welcome back to TeaBookClub. You'll find the details for TeaBookClub and for signing up to our monthly meetup in the information below. Every month we read a book and we meet at the end of the month to discuss it and share our thoughts on the book. This month we're reading A Social History of Tea by Jane Pettigrew and Bruce Richardson, which I'm really enjoying. In these videos, what I'm doing is doing a 5-minute reading from the book so that you can catch up, skip ahead, see what it's about, just get a general idea of the book. So, here we go. Jumping in at page 130, Afternoon Tea. It is impossible to pinpoint exactly when tea was first served as an afternoon event that took place between midday luncheon and evening dinner. Routines vary greatly between city and country, between classes and among individuals, depending on one's daily activities. But there is no doubt that sometime between the late 1830s and early 1840s, the taking of tea in the afternoon developed into a new social event that filled the refreshment gap between luncheon at noon and dinner at 7:30 or 8 p.m. And so, instead of waiting until 10 p.m. for after-dinner tea, some households began to serve tea at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Dinner and tea began to exchange places. The accepted tea legend attributes the invention of afternoon tea to Anna Maria, wife of the 7th Duke of Bedford, who wrote to her brother-in-law in a letter sent from Windsor Castle in 1841. I forgot to name my old friend Prince Esterhazy, who drank tea with me the other evening at 5 o'clock, or rather as my guest among 8 ladies at the castle. The Duchess is said to have experienced a sinking feeling in the middle of the afternoon one day because of the long gap between a very light luncheon at noon and dinner in the evening, and so asked her footman to bring all the necessary tea things and a little something to eat, probably the traditional bread and butter, to her private room in order that she might brew herself a refreshing cup of tea and stave off her hunger pangs. The actress Fanny Kemble described in a footnote to a letter she wrote on March 27, 1842, how her first experience of afternoon tea took place at Belvoir Castle in Rutland, where she and the Duchess of Bedford were house guests. I received on several occasions private and rather mysterious invitations to the Duchess of Bedford's room, and found her with a small and select circle of female guests of the castle, busily employed in brewing and drinking tea with her Grace's own private tea kettle. She added, I do not believe that the now universally honoured and observed institution of 5 o'clock tea dates further back in the annals of English civilization than to this very private and, I think, rather shamefaced practice of it. A visitor to the Duchess's own home, Woburn Abbey, in the 1840s, explained how Anna Maria had a tea room where she was to be found from 5 o'clock to 1:30, and where you may refresh yourself on arriving, as I did. Author Georgiana Sitwell wrote categorically in the 1830s, there was no gathering for 5 o'clock afternoon tea in those days, but most ladies took an hour's rest in their rooms before the 6 or 7 o'clock dinner, retiring thither with their books. It was not till about 1849 or 50 that 5 o'clock tea in the drawing room was made an institution, and then only in a few fashionable houses where the dinner hour was as late as 7:30 or 8 o'clock. My mother was the first to introduce the custom to Scotland, and this was a consequence of Lord Alexander Russell, who was staying with us at Balmoral, telling his mother, the Duchess of Bedford, always had afternoon tea at Woburn. These experiences varied around the country and in different social circles, but it was clear that these early tea gatherings initially took place in the late afternoon only in grand houses where aristocratic ladies required the habit of entertaining their afternoon visitors and friends with elegant cups of tea in the drawing room. By the 1870s, afternoon tea was beginning to find its place in wider circles, and Manners of Modern Society, written in 1872, described the way in which it had become a more established event. Little teas, it explained, take place in the afternoon, and were so called because of the small amount of food served and the neatness and elegance of the meal. They were also known as low teas, because guests were seated in low armchairs with low side tables on which to place their cups and saucers. Handed teas, since the hostess handed around the cups, and kettle drums, presumably because the kettle was a vital piece of equipment involved in the ceremony. The book continued, now that dinners are so late, and that teas proper, that is, after-dinner tea as it was taken in the earlier part of the century, are postponed in consequence to such an unnatural hour as 10 p.m, the want is felt of the old-fashioned meal at 5, and so it has been reinstated, though not quite in the same form as before. Diaries, journals, and memoirs from the second half of the century are full of references to tea. The diaries of Augusta, Viscountess Middleton, are typical. In 1855, tea features hardly at all. By 1862, there are regular references to tea at home and tea taken in other people's homes. In 1870, almost every day seems to have involved a tea party or gathering of some description. By the end of the century, afternoon tea had crossed all class barriers. Even in small villages and hamlets, what was referred to by some as a visitor's tea, that's 5 minutes, was a more refined occasion than most cottage meals. In an autobiographical account of her late 19th century childhood in an Oxfordshire village, Larkrise to Candleford, Flora Thompson describes tea with Mrs. Herring. The table was laid. There was the best tea things with a fat pink rose on the side of each cup, hearts of lettuce, thin bread and butter, and the crisp little cakes that had been baked in readiness that morning. Edmund and Laura, then young children, sat very upright on their hard Windsor chairs. She describes, too, how more impromptu tea gatherings were a regular event for village women. Those of the younger set would sometimes meet in the afternoon in one of their cottages to sip strong, sweet, milkless tea and talk things over. These tea drinkings were never premeditated. One neighbour would drop in, then another, and another would be beckoned from a doorway or fetched in to settle some disputed point. Then someone would say, "How about a cup of tea?" And they would all run home to fetch a spoonful, with a few leaves over to help make a spoonful for the pot. This tea drinking was the woman's hour. In Wales, the village women formed tea clubs it's Welsh, I cannot pronounce it, Clwb tea. I'm sure that's really, really bad. And as in earlier times when money was short, the needed equipment, food and drink were pooled. As Marie Trevelyan explained in 1893, one woman would bring tea, one a cake, another a drop of gin or brandy to put in it. They visited the homes of the members in turn and naturally gossiped about what interested women. The writer George Gissing summed up the social role of tea when he wrote at the end of the century, "Nowhere is the English genius of domesticity more notably evident than in the festival of afternoon tea. The mere chink of cups and saucers tunes the mind to happy repose." Thank you. I hope that was enjoyable. If you would like to follow TeaBookClub, just follow the link below. This month we have been reading A Social History of Tea by Jane Pettigrew. If you have read this or are reading it at the moment and would like to join our discussion at the end of the month, then get in touch or sign up through the link. Thank you.